Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of TBR, and I'm George Binns. And this evening we're talking about a local situation that you may have seen something in the papers about a big prostitution ring getting busted in Virginia and Boston. And there's a lot of activity locally on that. And to help us understand what's going on in our immediate neighborhood, there's an organization, Amirah, Inc., and we have tonight the Executive Director, Mary Speta. Mary, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I guess the thing that surprised me is that it's local. How local is it? How much of an area do you service?
Yeah, so for us, we serve folks from all across New England. Our services are based here on the North Shore of Boston. A lot of folks will come to us, or we have folks, coming out of Boston, coming out of Lynn, right here in Beverly. Mm-hmm. But the issue of sex trafficking, it's in every town and city in America. It's very much an American issue.
Oh, yeah. And I guess the problem that comes up is, okay, the cops come in, they bust a big operation, and what happens to the workers? So that's where I guess you guys step in and say, do something about it.
Yes, it's a great question. We do exit and aftercare services for adults who are coming out of the sex trade, and the vast majority of our clients have experienced sex trafficking. Yeah. And those exit services are really necessary to help them permanently exit the sex trade, because really what their vulnerabilities were that got them there in the first place are things like poverty and housing insecurity and substance use and the fact that they're foreign nationals and, they may have been brought here under false pretenses, et cetera. So those exit services, when they aren't available to them, we see really high rates of recidivism because they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah. So I guess that's the real problem. It's an economic problem that I can't imagine too many people who are doing this, getting into this trade just for the fun of it or for the excitement. So as I think you've started to point out, there's a lot of issues that bring people in it as the last resort. And because it's the last resort for them, they have run out of all their options. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that keeps popping up is they will check on some of these people coming across the border and find out that they were brought here, I think, as you said, under false pretenses. Oh, we're going to get you a job. Mm-hmm. Well, we got you a job. Mm-hmm. It's not 9 to 5. Mm-hmm. Well, it's not 9 a.m. to 5 a.m. It's a different 9 to 5. And they're trapped. Mm-hmm. So first of all, how do they find out about you?
Great question. We have partnerships with law enforcement, with social workers, with hospitals. We try to make sure that peer service providers that may end up coming across individuals who have experienced prostitution and sex trafficking know about us. Yeah. And then we receive referrals that way.
Yeah. And so if you get a referral, then what's the next step? Is there indoctrination of some sort?
And we have an intake process where we just make sure that we offer the right services for their needs. And if it's a good fit, they come to us, they go through our programs. We have an amazing rapid rehousing program where we are housing folks for 2 years and doing complete wraparound care to help them get to a point of economic independence. And then we continue to provide services once their housing has expired. But we can also offer those wraparound services to folks in the community who are housed elsewhere. Yeah. So we just want to make sure that we are the right fit for folks. And if we're not, we have a list of organizations in the area that we know that we refer to, because ultimately we want to get everyone connected to the services that they need.
Well, what are these other organizations like?
So oftentimes when we're working with folks that have experienced sex trafficking, we can be working with folks with highly unstable mental health challenges. Mm-hmm. So in that case, we're looking to other organizations that really specialize in behavioral health, permanent supportive housing for individuals with, challenges like schizoaffective disorder and things like that are unstable. They prevent them from going into employment. They prevent them from really assimilating into much of society for various reasons. So that's just one example of how we might connect someone with, another organization that specializes in their needs.
Yeah. So how many clients do you have? How big an operation is this?
So we serve anywhere between 100 and 120 individuals in any given year, depending on, who's out there, who needs our services.
Yeah. Yeah, I can imagine now that they busted the operation in Boston that you're going to get an influx of significant numbers, because I guess that was a pretty big operation.
It was, yes. And, while I can't comment on who ends up accessing our services, et cetera, but we do, other organizations we partner with across the state, we do try to raise our hands and say, hey, if you need us, we're here.
Yeah, so I guess the first attempt is the police, I guess, start with the people and try to get them into something else. And they would contact you. And once you got a contact, then you say, bring them into the organization, do sort of an analysis of what their problem is, what got them into this, and what's it going to take to get them out.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. And a huge overlap with this issue is the opioid crisis, the substance use disorder, because so many folks end up in prostitution and subsequently exploited and trafficked because of their addiction. Maybe they had an injury and they ended up on opioids, and then that ended up on heroin, and then, in order to pay for one thing, a drug dealer comes in and says, hey, if you do this for me, I'll, be your supply. Mm-hmm. Or, you lose your housing, or you're trying to pay for diapers for your kids, so you turn to prostitution because it's the only economic thing available to you. And then you start using substances to cope with the violence that you experience at the hands of those sex buyers and having to service 5, 10, 15 men a night. So substance use disorder is extraordinarily connected to prostitution and sex trafficking. They really go hand in hand.
Yeah. So every so often it'll pop up, there's a list of all these various functions that your group takes care of. And one of them, I guess, is you provide nights of freedom. There's the chart again. Mm-hmm. And so how do you provide somebody with a night of freedom? How do you get them out of the business, even for a short period of time?
Sure. So at the end of the day, we say that every woman we work with, she's the hero of her own story. We come alongside her and really partner with her in reaching her goals. Yeah. You really have to choose to leave and believe that it is possible. And that's where Nights of Freedom start, is that she comes to us, she's ready to get out, she's ready to take that next step. And when folks are housed with us, every night counts as a night of freedom. And so these numbers are from 2021. In 2022, we adopted our rapid rehousing program, and the Nights of Freedom have now significantly expanded through that because we're able to serve more folks.
So you can put them up for a night or two. It's almost like running a hotel away from the business.
Well, most of our rapid rehousing program is actually folks, we put them in their own apartments, and so every night that they are not trading sex, they're not with a trafficker, that's a night of freedom. And we count that as success because for so many of the people that we serve, they've been trafficked, they've been exploited, they've been trading sex for 5, 10, 15 years, many of them since they were children, 14, 15, 16 years old. They don't know a life apart from the sex trade. So every night that you're not in it is a win. Yeah.
So how do you account for all this social, emotional, or spiritual recovery? How do you do that?
Yeah, so we have a team of folks that really specialize in trauma recovery. And when we think about social, emotional, spiritual, that's sort of the one side of ourselves where we're thinking about the moral injury that they have experienced. Mm-hmm. We're thinking about the trauma that they have experienced. We're thinking about the care to their being that they need. And we think about how much time that takes.
Yeah.
Which is why we have it listed here in hours, because we spend so much time with women, and every hour is a win. Every time she's able to sit down with someone, with her mentor, and be able to talk through, what am I experiencing today? What am I feeling today? How did this impact me? That's huge.
So you have a mentor for every one of your clients.
Yes.
Yeah. How big an operation do you have?
So we're a small team. We have about 13 folks on our team, and then we have a host of volunteers that also work with us in the community, which is great. But yes, we are able to do, we make sure that we do a lot with the few resources that we have.
Yeah. So if you become somebody's mentor, you've got a whole list of people that you're working with.
Right, yes. You've got a caseload.
You've got a caseload, yeah. That's the magic word. Yeah. He also talks in here about vocational, mental, and physical recovery. Do you actually do vocational training? Do you get somebody some skills so they can get a job?
We focus a lot of our time on economic stability. Yes, economic stability and housing security. So what we do with folks is we'll do strengths assessments. We'll do a scope of, vocational opportunities for them. And then we work through with them around, what is it that you want to do? What speaks to you? Is it a trade school? Is it going for your associate's degree? We have someone in our program about to finish her bachelor's degree. About 60% of the women in our rapid rehousing program are actually enrolled in higher education. So, and a lot of that is because we live in an area with extraordinarily high cost of living, right?
Oh, yeah.
So what we are focused on is living wage jobs, not minimum wage jobs.
Yeah.
And these folks, they're incredibly smart, they're incredibly talented. It's not that, they aren't capable of going through school or college, et cetera. It's that the opportunity hasn't been available to them. So that's where we come alongside, and we open doors to make those opportunities available to them. And then, teach them, this is how you study. This is, we're going to get you connected with this group over here that will show you, how to really build out that resume. Where, you're interested in becoming a chef, we're going to get you connected with this group over here to, teach you how to cook. That's where we spend a good majority of our time.
Yeah. Well, it also talks about you have an outreach program. So I guess it's, how do you get your name out? Because until I was contacted by Leah, I had no idea you existed. And so how do you spread the word that you're in the business, you're here to help, and this is the kind of stuff you do?
Yeah, so our outreach program specifically reaches folks that are likely being trafficked or trading sex. So we'll go to other programs in the area where we have partnerships. We might host a group. We might have someone with lived experience go and make a personal connection with the folks. We have a community resource center in Lynn where we do events there right on Washington Street in Lynn. And so that's part of our outreach program where we're reaching folks out into the community, letting them know we're here if you need help.
Yeah. And you talk about community members educated in domestic sex trafficking. What is that about?
That's about sort of the conversation that we're having here. Sex trafficking nationwide, there can often be that myth or belief that it doesn't happen here, that it's a third world country. We think about, Southeast Asia or, these countries where it happens. But we spend a lot of our time educating folks on this because if we're not talking about prevention and we're not talking about demand reduction, then we're really just on a hamster wheel and our jobs get harder and harder because more and more people get stuck in the system of prostitution. So that education point with the community of, first of all, letting them know, yes, it absolutely happens here. And second, this is what we should all be looking for, and this is how we can all get involved to solve the problem.
Yeah. So, and then I guess you could talk about the health services, and I guess there's a lot of risk to the business, both from physical abuse and from STDs And as you mentioned earlier, substance abuse. So I would imagine the caseload is going to have a significant number of medical problems of varying degrees that have to be continually addressed. And how do you get them fixed? And how do you get people who don't have a job and probably don't have insurance coverage, how do you get them to some sort of medical treatment?
Yeah, so our case managers, when we're doing intake, this is one of the first things that they're looking at is, are you on Mass Health yet?
Yeah.
What are we doing to connect you to the services you need for your physical?
What does Mass Health do for?
So, that provides, excuse me. When you almost choke.
Oh, yeah. I know the feeling, yeah.
So Mass Health provides that insurance for folks that are below that, that economic barrier, folks in economic need.
Yeah.
Or folks who qualify it for some other way. We're extraordinarily lucky in Massachusetts to have this because it provides an avenue for us to then connect folks to the medical services that they need.
Yeah. So how do you get somebody involved in that? Take them to the local office, or?
Yes, there's an application process. There's a lot of paperwork that comes with it. Our case managers are quite good at it.
So your case managers are the ones that actually help them with the processing. Mm-hmm. Because as you mentioned earlier on, the people are in the business because they ran out of all opportunities. And that's the only thing left for them to do. And it sounds like that they just don't have the background, the experience, the education, and how the system works in order to avoid some of these problems, and that's why they're stuck in them. So I guess your case managers have to be pretty talented people that, the way you've been describing, they're doing a lot of different things. Mm-hmm. So I guess the question is, how do you train case managers?
Our case managers are social workers, so they come with a lot of that background, but so much of learning how to work with this population is working with this population.
Yeah.
We're taking folks who are coming to us often with absolutely nothing, and I mean nothing. No safe family connections, no friends, no work history, very few possessions, often just like trash bags of clothes, and that's it. And a 15-year history of being exploited. So what our team is doing, case managers combined with the rest of our team, is working with folks to, first of all, explore their options, because there's a process you have to go through of just first realizing, like, oh, shoot, I have options now, and I can choose for myself.
Yeah.
I haven't been able to choose for myself in, more than a decade. Yeah. So how do I go about making those choices? What is available to me? And then our team from there, once those goals have been identified, then we work in tandem with that person to get them to those goals. And it's different for everyone based on their individual experience.
You got into the business for lots of different reasons with lots of different problems.
Yes.
And so there's a lot to do. And I guess, as you mentioned, you start off with a social worker. Mm-hmm. Who has, I guess, got a college degree, or at least a exposure in 2-year college that has some background, and they get brought into your game, and they're working on it. Well, the other thing that has been mentioned a couple of times is try to decriminalize sex trade. And from what I've been able to pick up on it, it's a mixed bag, I guess, that too many people think, well, if you decriminalize it, you're legalizing it, and you get into all these moral issues. And at the same time, it's nice to have high moral standards, but you got people in trouble. Mm-hmm. And I guess the issue comes down to one of, how do you get to the point where, and this is one of the things that was mentioned several times, is people who are in the business know it's criminal, and therefore they're very reluctant to go to any authority and say, hey, I'm in trouble, I need help.
Yes.
And as a result, the system is trapping them in there and slamming the door shut.
Yes.
You can't get out. So I guess, how do you overcome this reluctance to somebody to say, hey, I'm in the business and I don't like it, I want out?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a great question around full decriminalization versus, other models. This happens to be my area of expertise as a researcher in this field. And we actually work as an organization with several other organizations as part of what's called the Emma Coalition in Massachusetts to propose policy that makes it more equitable for folks facing issues of prostitution and sex trafficking. And right now we have a bill in the Judiciary Committee called the Sex Trade Survivors Act. And it would be an extraordinary policy for Massachusetts. And what it would do is something called partial decriminalization, which many countries across the globe have adopted, where we're decriminalizing the sale of sex and maintaining penalties for sex buyers, third-party profiteers, and then the sex trafficking statute stays the same. And what this does is it brings prostitution law and sex trafficking law into alignment, because what you've described is exactly what's happening. Folks are experiencing sex trafficking, but when they encounter law enforcement, they don't necessarily know that they are experiencing sex trafficking, or if they do, they're afraid of their trafficker, so they're not going to raise their hands and say, hi, this is happening to me.
Yeah.
So then they appear that they're just engaging in prostitution of their own accord, and that's a criminal act. So then they end up with criminal records that prevent them from accessing housing and employment and working with children, all of these things that keep them then in the system of prostitution, and it becomes this revolving cycle.
Yeah, they're trapped.
By decriminalizing the sale of sex, we're decriminalizing those victims. 84% of people trading sex do not do so by choice. They have no economic alternative. And that number is actually, scholars believe, is rather low. It's probably more likely 90%.
Yeah, I would imagine, yeah.
And we think about prostitution often as a moral issue, as you've said, but prostitution really, for the person selling sex, is an issue of poverty, and it's an issue of violence.
Yeah.
Because the more often you trade sex, the longer you're in the sex trade, the more likely you are to experience violent crime. People in prostitution are the #1 targets for serial killers. Multiple studies that have surveyed folks trading sex have shown that they have experienced extraordinary amounts of violence, being threatened with weapons, being assaulted in horrific ways, all of those things. So the fact then that we're criminalizing them on top of it, and there's a disproportionate criminality there, because even though sex buyers right now are still criminalized, we have a 9-to-1 ratio of prostitution arrests, where 9 out of 10 prostitution arrests are of the person selling sex, and 1 out of 10 are the person buying sex. So the Sex Trade Survivors Act comes in and puts the focus where it needs to be, which is on the demand reduction. It provides services to the person selling sex rather than, time in jail. And then we're actually targeting the sex buyers and saying it is not okay to buy a poor person for sex simply because they're poor.
Yeah. Well, as we talked earlier on, you're a charity organization, and you need money.
Yes.
So this is your opportunity to talk to the audience and tell them where to send it.
Absolutely. So our website is on the screen, www.amirahinc.org. You can check us out, learn more about what we do. We're based right here in Beverly and serving particularly the surrounding communities. Every dollar that you give goes directly toward helping someone who has experienced sex trafficking and exploitation to rebuild their lives. So if you go to our website, there's a donate button there. We very much appreciate any and all support that comes our way.
Oh, that's short and sweet. Yes. And I guess there's a lot to be done, and you're working on it, but there's a very steep hill you're fighting. And I just don't see a very quick solution, but it never is for real problems. Yeah.
Absolutely, and we're dealing with real people and real lives. We think about, numbers can often distract us from the individual, that's sitting in front of us, and it is an overwhelming problem. Human trafficking is a $150 billion industry worldwide. We've seen a 25% increase in victimization within 5 years.
Yeah.
And those numbers are overwhelming. What we do at Amirah is we focus on every single person in front of us as the individual. And that's really the only way that we're able to help anyone exit successfully.
Yeah. It's a personal problem when they get sucked into it, and it takes a lot of personal attention
Absolutely.
to help them get out of it. And they really have to get out of it themselves, because I can imagine that it's so much easier to say, oh, well, that ain't working, and I know a John that'll pay good money, and I can go back into the business. And
Exactly.
recidivism is a challenge.
That often happens, and there's an extraordinary amount of familial trafficking in the United States, where folks are trafficked by a parent, a sibling, an uncle, and so then when you're raised in this situation where it's sort of normalized or it's expected of you, then you don't even know to expect to be treated any other way.
Yeah. They don't know there's another side to the world.
Yes.
Yep. And well, thank you very much for joining us this evening. It's a lot of help, and I hope you get some good hits with the request for support.
Thank you so much for having me.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. And if you have some comments, at the end of the credits is my email address. Send me an email. And if you have some more comments and you would like to have room here at the table, we can always make space available to you. And thanks again for joining us, and see you next time.